If you're tired of losing to win Lorraine decks, or maybe you just want to make your opponents groan in frustration over your control over the game, today's Water Assassin deck profile might be the deck for you. What's up everyone, it's Dan with Main Deck, and we are back again with another Grand Archive deck profile for you guys today. Today we are covering, finally, a Water deck and an Assassin deck all in one. We are covering a Water Zander deck. This is a Water Zander control deck whose sole goal is to grind out the game, control the game until you reach level 3, and then using the powerful Luxem package and Zander Blinding Steel level 3, you are going to control your opponent's game entirely at that point, gaining way too much life every turn for them to keep up with, dealing free damage, drawing extra cards, doing all that just fun stuff that if you're a control player at heart like me, you're really going to enjoy. So before I jump into the deck list, I want to just mention a couple of things, kind of where this deck is good and where this deck does still fall short a little bit. So right now, the metagame has a very powerful Win Lorraine deck. It's actually the first deck we profiled here too. Variants of that deck are quite potent in the metagame, as well as various Rye decks. This Water Zander control list has actually a decent game against the Lorraine decks. It's in fact, it's kind of built to be able to have the tools to be able to compete with Lorraine. Now, the Lorraine deck's still very strong. If your opponents are very skilled, you're still going to have a very difficult time. It's going to really come down to a lot of decision making as you're playing the game. Whereas Rye decks have an easier time with this Zander deck. You're going to struggle more against Rye decks, and against most Tamer decks and aggressive Assassin decks, you should have a pretty good matchup with this too. So really, if you have a lot of people playing like Lorraine decks in your area, or a lot of people playing aggressive decks, build this deck and you can kind of put them in their place a little bit. And maybe people will start to think, well, maybe I got to play some Rye instead, because Rye, I'll show you the tools we use to try and fight Rye too, but that is definitely a tougher matchup here. So let's jump right into this. We're going to start talking about the material deck here. Of course, we are playing Water, so we have Spirit of Water, Zander level 1, who is fine. He glimpses some cards. I will tell you right now, preparation counters do not matter for this list. I have nothing that has prepare on it, so don't even worry. I don't even put him on the character. It doesn't even matter. Zander level 2 does some extra damage to rested stuff. He's whatever. He's honestly Zander's weakest level, unfortunately, but Zander level 3 sure makes up for it by being extremely strong. So you got to understand, as we're looking at this deck, this is the core effect in this deck you have to know. Zander level 3 is at the beginning of your recollection phase. You may reveal all cards in your memory. For each Luxem element card revealed this way, each opponent puts a card from their hand into their memory. So you're going to give them fewer tools to work with that turn. They may have to try and use a reactive thing right away, because otherwise they won't have the cards to play it. Usually that part isn't actually that important, though. The point is you are going to get to reveal your memory for free every single turn. And we'll talk about why that matters in just a moment. Grand Crusader's Ring. Come on, I don't have to say anything about that one. We are playing Wind Resonance Boblin here because, if Wind Lorraine is everywhere, we're going to fight Wind with Wind Resonance. So I think it's a worthy slot in here. You certainly can replace it with something else if your metagame looks a little different. But hey, for mine, I got to play this card right now. It's like a second Grand Crusader's Ring in most of my matchups. We do have a thing you can side it out for too, if it's not very good. Orb of Regret. Also, I feel like this is kind of just a staple card right now. Very good in this deck for being able to late game actually pitch some of your water cards or extra dungeon guides or whatever and find more Luxem cards. Really nice to be able to filter out your hand. Luxera's Map, we are playing a grindy assassin deck, so this is actually really critical for getting kind of your late game combo together. It's important to have. Poison Dagger is in here. You want to save this for the kill turn generally. This is when you've finally kind of gotten your opponent ground down enough. You pop Poison Dagger and then use your combo to reveal a bunch of Lightweaver's Assaults in your memory. And for every Lightweaver's Assault there, the Poison Dagger is going to add an extra 1 damage because of that class bonus effect on it. Curve Dagger is in here just as a way to deal with sort of early, usually mid to late game threats on the board. You just got to clear them out, stop them from dealing damage to you. That's what it's there for. Orb of Choking Fumes. Now, this is a card I don't see being played too much, but Assassins do certainly like this card, and this deck has enough floating memory where the cost doesn't really matter to us very much. This is really in here as tech against the decks, specifically Rye and sometimes the Infusion Lorraine decks as well. They're going to go into these turns where they play tons and tons and tons of cards. You can get that orb ready. You do have to predict it very well. Usually the turn like Lorraine wants to level to 3 or Rye wants to level to 3 if he's built up enough cards. Either one of those, if you can have that orb in play at the start of their turn, you can pop it and you can make it so that they just simply aren't going to have the cards to be able to do their big combo. Usually it's kind of just buying you a turn so you can get yourself established. That's what it's here for. And then finally, Nullifying Lantern. Against fire decks, obviously this shuts down Rending Flames. Don't be afraid to try and get this out. Once you've started, I'll say right now, what you're trying to do with this deck is get to level 3 as quickly as possible so you can establish your control. Once you've gotten to level 3, even against Lorraine decks, bringing in Nullifying Lantern will shut down their ability to shift Crux cards into their hand using Crux Sight, which stops it kind of stops some of their crazier combos they need to assemble in order to kill you. So certainly a good card in those matchups. Against Fire Lorraine, you probably want to put this out as fast as possible. Any fire deck that is trying to Rending Flames you want to take a turn early on to get this out. Otherwise, you can kind of look to play it in the late game against some of those Crux-based Lorraine decks instead. It doesn't do anything to you, thankfully. Other water decks may or may not, depend. Like Water Sylvie, this can certainly do some things against. Just check your opponent's decks, check your opponent cards, see what it's good against. Certainly a card you can take out though if it doesn't do anything to your opponent when you're sideboarding. All right, so let's jump into the main deck. I'm actually going to start at the very beginning just so you can understand the combo. If you have not seen this before, we're going to look at our Luxem cards. So we're playing a bunch of Luxem cards that do something when they are revealed from your memory. And so the goal again is to get to level 3 Zander as quickly as possible and then start to reveal these cards from your memory every single turn to compound their effects. Lightweaver's Assault has, I'm going to start at the bottom, class bonus, element bonus. When you reveal Lightweaver's Assault from your memory, choose a unit and deal 2 damage to it. You're going to use this just to keep the board clear until you've established full control, and then you're just going to start aiming the damage at your opponent's face. You're going to be able to, either as an emergency wipe or to take your opponent out to win the game, you can play Lightweaver's Assault for 4, reveal all cards in your memory, choose any amount of units, and deal damage equal to the amount of cards revealed. This way, split among them. The important thing to know about this is if you're, when you're getting that kill turn, if you build a big enough hand, you need a 10 card hand to do this. But keep in mind what you can do is you can activate a Lightweaver's Assault, and then before it has resolved, because it's fast speed, activate another Lightweaver's Assault. That way your memory will have 8 cards in it when you resolve both effects of the stacked Lightweaver's Assaults, and you reveal all 8 cards both times. Meaning you're going to do 16 damage, minimum. If you have more Lightweaver's Assaults, you're going to get some more triggers and everything. So that is one way you're just going to end the game. Lightweaver's Assault, I'm going to straight say right now, this card's expensive right now. Even the Ultra Edition ones, as I'm recording this video, I think go for about $25 a piece. And I straight up would not build this deck without Lightweaver's Assaults. You're not going to quite get there. It's not going to have quite the potency you need. But if you have access to these cards, then this is when you can build this deck. So moving on here, we have Luxem Sight. Luxem Sight is a critical card for this deck as well. Whenever you reveal it from your memory, you get to recover 3. This is how you're going to stay in the game against the more aggressive decks. And this is where if your opponent's deck does not have a way to just dunk you in one turn, they honestly need to concede once you get to level 3 if you have this set up. You're gonna win. You're not gonna lose the game against those decks unless they can find a way to dunk you, because every single turn you're gonna cover 3, 6, 9, whatever, depending how many Luxem Sights you have, and it will feel completely insurmountable to your opponent. I almost never play this card to draw a card. I have to be in a dire strait to play it from my hand. Otherwise, I just want it in my memory all the time. But a card I do play in Luxem is Uncover the Plot. So what Uncover the Plot's gonna do is target yourself, of course, reveal all cards in your memory, and then boom, you get all the activations from your Lightweaver's Assaults, from your Luxem Sights, and from the Gleaming Cuts, which I'm about to talk about as well. And then you also get to draw a card. And then it puts 2 preparation counters on your champion, but we don't care about those. Whatever, doesn't matter in this deck. But the point is, you spend 2, you get to replace one of those, the card you played from your hand, by drawing a card, and you're going to get all these effects again. It is the great thing about this card, the reason it's a 4 of in here, I don't see a lot of people necessarily running it as a 4 of, is because once you hit level 3, you're often fairly low on cards, but sometimes you are able to have enough cards in hand to uncover the plot the same turn you hit level 3 if you're like dungeon guiding or something. Especially, that's when you're really low on cards to do that, but you can still potentially uncover the plot and then get those activations, and that can like clear the board or keep you in the game by gaining life, or fill your hand up with cards, which is what Gleaming Cut does as well. Again, this is a card I do not usually use it to attack, but I can see situations where you'd want to do that. You might want to keep that in mind when you're doing the math to figure out how to take your opponent out, because this does do 4 damage when you reveal a Luxem card. It does, when you play it to attack, it allows you to reveal a card and get a trigger from, another Gleaming Cut or a Lightweaver's Assault or something. But really what I like to do is just stuff this into my memory, reveal it, and then banish it to draw 2 cards using its class bonus, element bonus effect. The last Luxem card here is Excalibur Cleansing Light. This card, first of all, class bonus doesn't matter. Obviously, that's for like if you have Trisket or maybe some future champion. But this card is in here specifically because it is a fast speed spell that destroys just about anything in the game. I mean, it can't destroy your opponent's champion, but otherwise anything in the game. So Excalibur Cleansing Light is such an important card in certain matchups. You have to keep in mind that you can't just like willy-nilly kind of blow whatever up just to clear the board. What you want to do with this, especially in this like Wind Lorraine and Fusion Lorraine matchup, your opponent is going to go for this play. They're going to have a sword out of some kind. If they're smart, it's Sword of Seeking. They're going to have a sword out of some kind. They're going to go, I'm going to activate Infusion on it. I'm going to activate Spirit Blade. It's Spirit Blade Infusion. Activate maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 infusions. I've seen that, which allows them to hit you, draw 1 million cards, do 1 million damage. As soon as they go to swing with their sword, then you destroy the sword with Excalibur. Gets rid of all the effects, the on-damage effect, the attack bonus. It deals with the threat that turn, and that is so critical. Likewise, if your opponent's playing like a big Tamer deck or something, there's certainly some big like Gorillas or stuff that you're going to want to Excalibur. And sometimes if your opponent's trying to play defensively to deal with your Lightweaver's Assault by perhaps they're playing something like Safeguard Amulet, you can actually use Excalibur, again, fast speed, keep that in mind, pop the Safeguard Amulet at the end of their turn so that when you go to your Recollection step, they cannot pop it to protect themselves from dying. So awesome card. We'll talk about the sideboard. We have 2 more copies of this in the sideboard, just 2 in the main right now, because it doesn't do anything on reveal and stuff. It is very good in a lot of matchups, but sometimes you only want to see like a copy of it right at the right time. So we don't have to run a ton of it unless it's critical to not lose the game like it is against Wind Infusion Lorraine. Okay, so now on to the non-advanced element stuff. This deck, first of all, has 20 floating memory cards in it. We are stacked on floating memory cards because it is really critical. We'll show you through. We'll start by going with the allies here. Kingdom Informant is our 2-cost ally, stealth floating memory. There's a floating memory drop. It's often, if you put it in play, it's not going to die very easily. It plinks extra damage off and helps you combine that damage with some of the other things like a Drawn Cut or something in order to kill some of the higher life allies that you're going to encounter. But yeah, it's there because it has floating memory. That's why. Nia Mistveiled Scout. I have really enjoyed Nia in the plays that I've done with this, especially because do not forget with Nia, she has stealth and she lets you name any card, including cards that are in your opponent's material deck. They cost 1 more to play. It does not specify reserve or memory cost, so it applies to whatever the cost of the card is. Meaning, one of my favorite things to do in this deck is to go turn 1, Nia Mistveiled Scout, naming Lorraine Wandering Warrior if my opponent's playing Lorraine, which means that unless they have a way to like Zephyr her out end of turn or something, my opponent's just gonna have to pay 2 cards to get their Lorraine level 1 out. Sometimes they can't even do that, depending on what their setup is like on their first turn. But other times that just is gonna cost them an extra card. And at that point, we're just playing it. We're kind of discarding their cards, getting rid of their resources. The goal is to slow Lorraine down enough so that you can take control of the game before she kills you. And so that's where I like to play Nia like that. Sometimes, you're going to look at their memory, you're going to pick a card and just make it a little clunkier to play, but I think she's most effective naming material deck cards if you can accurately predict what your opponent's going to do. Just be careful, because if you're trying to name like Lorraine level 2 or 3, Dungeon Guide will get around this extra cost entirely. And if they have a dungeon guide, they will they'll not care. They're just going to play the dungeon guide instead. So keep that in mind. We have 2 Snow Fairy. Snow Fairy is very nice. It just happens to be one of the slightly less important cards in this deck, but it shuts down allies from dealing damage to you. It can protect you from a good amount of damage, especially if you're playing against like a Tamer deck or something. But even you know, like just making any random human tapped when your opponent's playing like Phalanx captains and stuff will end up saving you a good amount of damage, and that stealth is quite annoying to deal with. Intrepid Highwaymen, powerful assassin card. Intercept, obviously really nice. You're often going to keep them untapped to be able to block attacks, unless it is better just to like combine damage to kill something big. She retaliates for 4 damage, so she's going to be able to block and kill Phalanx captains. Your opponent's going to target her very quickly, which is fine because she has floating memory. So she's awesome card. Frostsworn Paladin is just a crazy powerful card. Hope to see more stuff like this for Water and for Assassin to really help kind of shore up the strength level of the deck. But Frostsworn Paladin is a 2/3 for 3 with Intercept, and on enter, banish a card with floating memory. Again, we're playing 20 of them, which helps us activate our Frostsworn Paladins as well. And if you do, you put a buff counter on her and draw a card, making her a 3/4 with Intercept, draw a card for 3, which is just nutty. Since that floating memory you were probably going to use to banish for something, it's really just kind of like turning a card in your graveyard into a card in your hand, which is better for sure. Late game though, that turns a card that wasn't doing anything into a card that can do something. So she's awesome all around every stage of the game. Dungeon Guide is a 4 of. I think right now in most decks, probably you want to be thinking about 4 of Dungeon Guide, because a lot of these decks in the metagame right now are going to level 3 to do crazy stuff. And you want to be in that race going to level 3 as quickly as possible. In fact, I would say if you're worried about anything being potentially banned or restricted in this game, Dungeon Guide is the thing that I think I could potentially see being like restricted to limit 1 per deck or something to reduce the consistency at which people are able to zip up to level 4. But right now we got to keep up with him, so we play Dungeon Guide. Tide Diviner. Man, okay, I want to talk about Tide Diviner, but I first want to talk about Idle Thoughts. So Idle Thoughts is one of our floating memory package cards here. It's a card that I initially was very low on, but I have certainly picked up on this card. I like it a lot in fire decks where you can discard it. In this deck, I like it because of Tide Diviner. Your ideal play in this often is when you're at level 0, turn 1, you want Idle Thoughts and set up the top cards of your deck, putting a floating memory card in the second or third card down. And then next turn you use the Idle Thoughts, floating memory to level up to level 1. Your glimpse doesn't really matter in this case, but who cares? And then you play a Tide Diviner, which will let you look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You will discard the floating memory card that you set there and grab the card you actually wanted, which means Tide Diviner effectively became a draw 2 for you. That also can, add on damage and ended up killing things just to help control the board, which is really nice. Very powerful play. That's the kind of stuff you need to do to keep up with the insane card draw in decks like Lorraine and Rye right now. So I think after a lot of testing with different versions, I think this 4 of Idle Thoughts, 4 of Tide Diviner build is the ideal way to build this deck to be able to maintain that card advantage, so that you can get to your level 3 in enough time and then be able to keep the cards in your hand to be able to activate your critical cards, which we're going to go into shortly, to control the game. Also in our floating memory package is Chilling Touch. It occasionally does things like kind of cool, banishing a card at random from your opponent's memory, like kind of stifling their turn a little bit or something. That's not really too important. The point is you can play this turn 1, put floating memory in, and then use it to level up. Just lets you control what you're doing. Often your turn 1, because of the cost of everything, your turn 1 is going to be like playing an Idle Thoughts or a Chilling Touch and one of your 3-drop things. A Nia, like I said, might be an Intrepid Highwayman or something. That's the kind of stuff you're going to often want to do on turn 1. Turn 2, if you can have the setup for it to be able to Tide Diviner, that's going to be really great. But otherwise, at that point, your goal is going to be to start to just kind of keep your opponent's board under control, get your card advantage going, get your floating memory in the graveyard so that you're always banishing cards you don't care about. Your goal is to never banish a Luxem card if possible, because you want all of these things for the late game. Really one of the best floating memory cards for Assassin is Drown Cut. It does damage, and then it's floating memory. It's going to help you control the board, or, if you've got nothing else, just hit your opponent for a couple damage. Late game, it does some damage, which is great. It can be useful because you can actually make Xander's level 2 do something. If your opponent's playing a deck that attacks with their champion, Xander will do 3 damage with Drown Cut, which is nice, and it does come up on allies as well, specifically in order to help you get those thresholds. So like Drown Cut with Zander's bonus is 3 damage, and then you get the extra 1 damage from attacking with a Kingdom Informant or a Tide Diviner or a Nia or something. That'll help you get to that 4 life threshold to take out Phalanx Captains and Tactful Sergeants, that kind of stuff. Great card, though. Great card. And then these two, Shroud and Mist and Water Barrier, these are our clutch control cards. So the big thing to be thinking about always as you're playing this deck, and an important skill testing moment, is you need to be predicting when you are going to need to have one of these cards in your hand and hold it in the hand. As soon as you find one, hold on to it. Again, that's why we're playing things like Glimpse and Tide Diviner to try and like dig and find these cards. And draw a whole bunch of cards with Gleaming Cut, because you need to find, if it's against a Lorraine deck or another attacking deck, Shroud and Mist needs to be in your hand, and you need to predict when your opponent's going to try to kill you so you can buy a free turn. It only costs 3 for Assassin, gives all your units stealth. Your opponent declares an attack, you use it in response, suddenly you're stealthed and you can take no damage. And if they're happen to be attacking an ally for some reason, you can actually still retaliate at that point. Even though your unit has stealth and won't take damage, their unit still will take damage from retaliating. Little pro tip to be aware of with that as well. Or if they're playing like a Rye deck or something similar, an Erupting Rhapsody deck of some kind, Water Barrier will be there to prevent all but 1 damage from something. Be aware with fire decks that this is the next time you'd be dealt damage. A savvy player will, like Arcane Blast you, you'll go Water Barrier in response, and they'll go, okay, in response, I will use a, 2 damage, Ignite the Soul or something, 1 damage spell. It doesn't matter. Use something at fast speed to pierce that Water Barrier, because then they'll let the Water Barrier resolve and then play that spell to kind of take the Water Barrier out, and then their full Arcane Blast goes through and deals with you. So you have to be aware that can happen. Water Barrier is not the greatest card in the world for dealing with stuff. It is certainly not Veiling Breeze, but it's there because it's the tool we have. Really the best tool in Water to deal, and the reason why Water, I think, is a playable thing depending on your metagame, is Shroud and Mist. Getting that stealth is huge. You just have to be aware that your opponent, if they're smart, will keep their Sword of Seeking in play so that they have true sight to be able to break through your stealth. And that's where Excalibur can also be extremely clutch, getting rid of that sword so that they can't continue to pierce through your stealth that way. So that's really the deck. Again, you're just trying to control the opponent. You're trying to get to level 3. Once you get to level 3, you want to just get your assaults, get your sights, get your Gleaming Cuts into your memory, and then every single turn you're going to reveal everything, kind of mess with their hand a little bit, and then get a whole bunch of effects. Recover a bunch, deal damage to things, clear the board, draw the cards, play to uncover the plot, reveal everything again, draw more cards, deal more damage, heal more damage. You just keep doing that, and you will grind your opponent out. A savvy opponent will know when they have lost the game, and they will concede. Ideally, this deck will play long. You do want to play this deck a little bit, learn to try and play it pretty fast, because you may get in these matches where you have to win game 1, and then you'll be grinding out game 2 when time will be called. So it's going to be important that you try to win game 1, which is why we put so many just diverse tools in here. But speaking of that, and I'm going to kind of screw up our display a little bit here, but I do want to talk about our sideboard. Actually, no, I'll pop the cards up on the side here. Our sideboard, and I'll tell you the numbers. The sideboard that I'm currently running here, and you can certainly tweak this for your own meta. I'm running 2 Excalibur Cleansing Light, 2 additional ones that you can put in over cards that are less useful, like Water Barrier or something, depending on the matchup. You can certainly remove some of the floating memory stuff as well if you feel like you need to keep Water Barriers in. I have run the 4th copy of Shroud and Mist in the sideboard. You bring that in when, we're playing Infusion Lorraine. We need to have Shroud and Mist. We want that 4th copy. The other 2 copies of Water Barrier are in the side for if we're dealing with Rye. We just want to have as many tools as possible. Fighting a Rye deck is going to be about just being prepared when they go for the kill, blanking their kill cards, and then going back to trying to plink damage on them until they die. And then when they go for the kill, you want to have another Water Barrier or something, another way to deal with that. Maybe have your Orb of Choking Fumes or something ready that time, and just try and keep stalling them until you can kill them. Rye will be tough, but it is a winnable matchup also. Lunette Frostbinder Feast. I have 2 copies of Lunette in here. Lunette is in particular shoring up any fire deck, but basically any fire deck, because a lot of fire decks are playing cards like Hasty Messenger, who are just in there to drop down, swing, and discard a floating memory card, draw a new card. Lunette will make it so they can't do that. They just come into play and then they go, oh, okay, I'm rested. I can't do anything. And then on your turn, you go ahead and you draw and cut them or something, or you attack them with your little one attack allies or whatever and deal with them. So Lunette's very good against it. We have 2 copies in there. She's nice to see in those matchups. I would have more, but the sideboard is just so tight. If you have a lot of fire aggressive decks running in your meta, feel free to either mainboard this or put more in the sideboard, definitely. And then the last sideboard card I have is 1 Safeguard Amulet in here, which you're going to swap in. You can, if you're playing a non-wind deck, then you're playing probably a fire deck, or you might be playing another Zander deck. In either case, Safeguard Amulet's going to be a useful card for you, so you can swap out that Wind Resonance Bauble for the Safeguard Amulet. Otherwise, if you're playing like a Wind Rye deck or something where you want to keep that Wind Resonance Bauble, you would take out the Curved Dagger because it doesn't really matter dealing with allies in that deck, and put in the Safeguard Amulet instead. Safeguard Amulet is a critical card for if your opponent's playing Advent of the Stormcaller, because this will completely blank Advent of the Stormcaller. Otherwise, you can use it just to try and preserve yourself on the turns where your opponent's going to try and throw a bunch of damaging spells at you, and you need to just cling on so that next turn you can heal back up a little bit and try and get back in the game. Be very careful with your timing, as with everything. Playing this deck well is really going to come down to how well you can predict what your opponent is doing. This is a control deck. That's the name of the game. That's how they work in every card game. In this one, try and guess how your opponent is playing, guess when they're going to dive in and try and kill you, and prepare accordingly with your materialize phases and with the cards that you keep in hand. Always, always keep up the cards in hand to be able to play Shroud and Mist or Water Barrier when it's required. Often, you're going to have turns with this deck where you're going to do nothing. You're just going to pass. Because if you go ahead and you aggressively play an Intrepid Highwayman or something just to get these cards, even when you're level 3, just to get them into your memory, that's when your opponent goes, oh, he or she is out of ways to deal with my problems, so I'm going to go ahead and attack them now because they can't play Shroud and Mist. And it's better just to keep your Shroud and Mist up. If they don't do anything, that's fine. Your next turn, you're going to draw another card, and then maybe you'll have enough cards in hand to be able to do something and keep your Shroud and Mist up. Just take it slow. You have inevitability. You will be able to control the game in a lot of matchups. That said, Lorraine still is a hard matchup and still can come up with ways to one-shot you. So I'm not saying do nothing all the time, but sometimes don't be afraid to do nothing, if that makes any sense. I know that can be kind of confusing, but control decks, that's how we are. That's how we're trying to deal with everything in the game. So, I hope you guys found that interesting. That is our Water Zander deck profile. We have been testing and tweaking this deck quite a bit. I am very happy with the current state of this build. There are a number of cards that we have tested and tried and are not including, things like Revitalizing Cleanse, things like the 2 damage spell. I already forgot the name of it, whatever. Those kinds of cards have places for sure. Copies of Lunette in the main board have been tested. I think there's pros and cons to them, but overall, we like this version of it quite a bit. I think there are some issues. I'm happy to discuss them. If there's any cards you have questions about why we're not playing it in here, we have probably tried it, and I'm happy to talk to you. Go ahead and leave a comment down below with what you think about this deck, if it's something you want to use to tackle your metagame, or if you have questions about why we're not playing X, Y, or Z. Just go ahead and drop in the comments. We'd be happy to answer. I'll be in there chatting with you guys, letting you know what we think about all these different options that we have. Overall, I love this deck. I think it's very fun. I do not think it's the most powerful deck in the meta, because I think right now that is still Wind Lorraine, with some Rye decks being, quite on the cusp as well. But this is a great way to shake things up and way to kind of sometimes put Lorraine in her place, because she just won't have ways to get through this, especially if your opponents are still kind of learning the ropes on Lorraine and you have a little better handle. You can win easily by having the skill in this matchup and have a lot of fun doing it, because Water and Assassin just aren't getting played as much. And I'm looking forward to set 2 to see what that brings to the table. If we have more stuff like Frostsworn Paladin, these kinds of decks are going to start to get quite out of control. But for now, this is kind of the deck we're rocking, and it works. So thank you guys for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this deck profile. We will have more Grand Archive content for you coming next week. Hey, do not miss, we are going to have a special preview. We're kicking off Fractured Crown preview season on Thursday, June 1st, with our special spoiler video here. Don't miss that. Come on back for that. We will see you there. And we are so excited to show you the cards we're previewing. They are very cool. So hope you guys enjoy again. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching another Main Deck video. Main Deck is sponsored by Troll and Toad. Visit trollandtoad.com and use discount code MAINDECK5 to get 5% off your purchase and support the channel. And by JWW Sports Cards and Gaming. Visit jwwcards.com. And by our amazing patrons. Get exclusive content and other cool perks on the Main Deck Patreon. And hey, while you're here, I bet you'd like one of these videos. Go ahead, click one. I know you're gonna love it.